The blood never washes away. Not really. Even now, as I sit in this wheelchair, these 100-year-old hands still feel warm with it. Their blood, my brother's blood. The kind of brothers you don't find through birth, but through bullets and shared terror. My name is James William Cooper, and I am the last one left. The sole survivor. The one who lived while they died. The one who promised to remember. When I close my eyes at night, I still see them. Mikey with half his body gone, smiling as he told us to run. Sam crumpled in the snow, red spreading beneath him like spilled wine. Rick calling for his father as the light left his eyes. Frank, burning with fever, using his last breath to save my life. They were just boys. We were all just boys. 18, 19, 20 years old. Boys who had never kissed a girl, never held a child, never traveled more than 50 miles from home. Boys who dreamed of diners and butcher shops and building bridges. Boys who never got to become men. Tomorrow, I turn 100 years old. A century of life I got to live because they died. A century of birthdays and anniversaries and children and grandchildren that they never had. This old harmonica in my hands is the only thing I have left from that time. The silver's worn away where my lips have pressed against it for 80 years. Every note it plays is a ghost. Every melody a prayer for the dead. Tonight, I'll play for them one last time. My fingers don't work like they used to. My breath is shallow now. But for them four, my brothers, I'll find the strength. This is our story. The story of 5 boys who went to war, and only one who came home. I turned 100 years old last Tuesday. A century of life weighs heavy on these old bones. The nurses at Oak Ridge Veterans Home brought me a cake with too many candles, a fire hazard, I joked, but I couldn't blow them all out. My lungs, like the rest of me, aren't what they used to be. My name is James William Cooper. Most people call me Jim, though there aren't many left who do. I was born in 1925 in a small farmhouse in rural Kentucky, the eldest of 5 children. My father worked the land, tobacco mostly, some corn when the soil could bear it. My mother kept the house and kept us in line. We weren't rich by any measure, but we had food on the table and a roof that only leaked in 3 places. In those days, that was enough. The harmonica sitting on my bedside table is more worn than I am, if that's possible. The silver plating has long since worn away where my lips have pressed against it year after year. My father gave it to me when I was 9 years old. I can still remember that Christmas morning, the way the metal caught the firelight. How impossibly fancy it seemed to a boy who'd never owned anything that wasn't handed down from someone else. A man ought to have music in him, my father said when he placed it in my hands. He wasn't a man of many words, my father. His hands were calloused from farm work, his skin weathered and tanned deep as old leather. He didn't read books or go to church much, but he believed in music. On summer nights, he'd sit on the porch with his own harmonica, a beat-up old thing that predated even him, and play tunes that seemed to rise up from the earth itself. I taught myself to play by listening to him. By the time I was 15, I was good enough to join him on that porch. We'd play as the sun set over the fields. My mother shelling peas or mending clothes. My brothers and sisters chasing fireflies in the yard. Those were simple nights. Beautiful nights. The kind of memories that a man clings to when everything else has been taken from him. I had dreams back then, simple ones. I wanted to work the land like my father, maybe find a nice girl from church to marry, have children, play my harmonica on summer evenings, watch my family grow while I grew old among the fields I'd known my whole life. but the world had other plans for me. The war came for us like it came for everyone. Pearl Harbor changed everything. I was 16 when it happened, too young to enlist right away, though I tried. My father caught me forging his signature on the enlistment papers. He didn't say a word, just took the pen from my hand and tore the papers in half. "Your time will come," he said. "Let others go first." I was furious with him then. I didn't understand what he knew, that war would find me soon enough, and that there was no glory in it. My father had fought in the First World War. He never spoke of it. Not once in all the years I knew him. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I'd hear him crying out in his sleep, fighting battles that had ended decades ago. When I turned 18 in 1943, I enlisted the very next day. My mother cried. My father didn't, he just nodded, like he'd always known this day would come, and slipped something into my pocket as he hugged me goodbye. "Keep it safe," he whispered, "and let it keep you safe." It was a small silver cross on a chain. The only thing of value he'd ever owned besides his wedding ring. I wore it every day I was overseas. I wear it still. The day I left home, I packed light, some clothes, my father's cross, and the harmonica. The recruiter at the enlistment office laughed when he saw it. "Son," he said, "this ain't no church social. Where you're going, there won't be time for music." How wrong he was. In the years to come, that harmonica would save my life, and my soul, more times than I could count. Basic training was at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, close enough to home that I could almost feel it, but far enough that I might as well have been on the moon. It was there I met the 4 men who would become more than friends, more than family. Michael "Mikey" Rodriguez was from Arizona. His father had come up from Mexico to work the copper mines. Mikey had his father's work ethic and his mother's smile, wide and genuine. The kind that made you smile back, even when there was nothing to smile about. He was shorter than most of us, but strong as an ox and twice as stubborn. He dreamed of opening a diner when he got back home, Rodriguez's place. He called it. He'd described the menu in detail during night watches. Green chili stew, enchiladas, apple pie with ice cream. Best of both worlds, he'd say. Just like me. Single quotes, Frank Washington was the oldest of us at 22. He'd been to college for 2 years before he enlisted, studying engineering at Howard University. Smart as a whip and serious most of the time, though when he laughed, it was like thunder rolling across the sky. Frank was from Harlem, New York, and had never seen stars like the ones we'd stare at during night exercises. After this is over, he'd say, "I'm going to build bridges that last 100 years." I believed him. Sam Goldstein was our medic. Jewish kid from Boston with hands steady as stone. His father was a doctor, and Sam had picked up enough to patch us up when official medics weren't around. He played chess when he could find a partner, usually Frank. Sam didn't talk much about after the war. Said it was bad luck. "Just want to get home in one piece," he'd say. "Everything else is gravy." Rick O'Malley was barely 18 when he joined us. Baby-faced Irish kid from Chicago with red hair and more freckles than stars in the sky. He'd never been away from home before. First night of basic, I found him crying in his bunk, trying to hide it from the rest of us. I sat with him, showed him my harmonica, played a quiet tune. After that, he stuck to me like a shadow. His father owned a butcher shop, and Rick told endless stories about learning to cut meat, about the customers who came in every week for their special orders. When I get back, he'd say, "I'm going to take over the shop. Put my old man into retirement." None of us knew then that only one of us would make it home. We completed basic together, shipped out together. Landed in England in the spring of 1944. trained some more, waited. The invasion was coming. Everyone knew it, but nobody knew when or where exactly. The waiting was almost worse than fighting. I played my harmonica in the barracks at night. Quiet tunes, nothing fancy. Folk songs from home, church hymns, whatever I could remember. The other boys would listen. Sometimes Mikey would sing along in his rich baritone. Rick would tap out rhythms on his knees. Even the serious ones, Frank and Sam, would stop what they were doing and listen. When this is over, Mikey said one night we should start a band. Cooper and the Killers, we'd make a fortune. We laughed at that. We laughed a lot back then, before we knew what was waiting for us across the channel. We didn't participate in D-Day. Our unit was held in reserve, sent over weeks later as replacement troops. By the time we arrived in France, the initial landings were history. But the war, the real war, was just beginning for us. I won't describe every battle, every firefight, every terrible day that followed. Some memories are too heavy to put into words, and some horrors shouldn't be spoken aloud. But I'll tell you this, nothing prepares you for war. Not training, not movies, not books, nothing. The noise is what I remember most. The constant, overwhelming noise. Gunfire, explosions, planes overhead, tanks rumbling, men shouting, men screaming, men dying. After a while, it all blended together into one terrible symphony, the soundtrack of hell itself. We fought through France that summer and fall. Town after town, field after field. Some places welcomed us as liberators. Others were just empty shells, the buildings reduced to rubble, the people long fled. We slept when we could, in barns, in foxholes, occasionally in actual beds when we were lucky enough to be billeted with civilians. We ate when food was available. We marched until our feet bled, then kept marching. Through it all, we five stayed together. Different squads, different platoons, sometimes, but we always found each other. We looked out for each other. When Sam took shrapnel in his leg outside of a small French village, whose name I never learned, Frank and I carried him 3 miles to a field hospital. When I came down with pneumonia in October, Mikey traded his chocolate rations for extra medicine. When Rick froze up during an ambush, unable to move or shoot, it was Frank who dragged him to safety. Talking to him the whole time in that steady voice of his, "You're okay, Irish, I got you. Just breathe. That's it. Just breathe." We became more than friends. We became a unit within a unit. The officers noticed. They started keeping us together on assignments. The Fabulous Five, our lieutenant called us, though there was nothing fabulous about what we were doing. I still played the harmonica when I could. Not often, there was little time and less privacy, but sometimes, in the quiet moments between horrors, I'd take it out. Play something soft, something from home. The other boys never complained, even when they were bone-tired and needed sleep. The music was a lifeline to another world, a reminder that somewhere, normal life continued. By December, we were in eastern Belgium, moving toward the German border. The weather had turned bitterly cold. Snow covered everything. Our uniforms weren't made for such cold. Not enough layers, boots that let the wet in. We were always cold, always wet, always hungry. None of us knew it then, but the Germans were planning one last major offensive. They called it Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine. We would come to know it as the Battle of the Bulge. On December 16, 1944, all hell broke loose. The German attack caught everyone by surprise. The front lines collapsed. Units were separated. Communications cut. Chaos reigned. Our company was overrun in the initial assault. We scattered into the Ardennes forest, trying to regroup, trying to find friendly forces. That's how the 5 of us ended up alone, cut off from our unit, deep in enemy territory. It was the coldest winter anyone could remember. Temperatures fell to well below zero. Snow piled waist-deep in places. The trees offered some protection from the wind, but trapped the cold like a refrigerator. We had one blanket between us, taken turns huddling under it for short stretches of fitful sleep. We had little ammunition, less food. Our map was outdated, and without the sun visible through the constant cloud cover, we were navigating mostly by guesswork. We knew American forces had to be somewhere west of us, but west became an abstract concept in those dense woods. For 3 days, we moved carefully through the forest. We avoided roads, kept to the thickest parts of the woods. Twice, we nearly walked into German patrols. Once, we hid in a drainage ditch as a tank column rumbled past just yards away. On the 4th day, our luck ran out. We were crossing a small clearing, a mistake, but we were desperate to make faster progress. Halfway across, Mikey stepped on something buried in the snow. There was a metallic click. "Don't move," Sam whispered, kneeling to carefully brush away the snow around Mikey's foot. It was a mine, an S-mine, what the Germans called a bouncing Betty. Once triggered, if pressure was released, it would spring up to waist height before detonating. "If I lift my foot, it blows," Mikey said, his voice surprisingly calm. "We'll figure something out," Frank said, already looking around for something heavy enough to replace Mikey's weight once he stepped off. "There's nothing to figure out, Professor," Mikey said with a sad smile. Then he looked at me. "Cooper, play me something. One of those church songs your mama taught you." "Mikey, don't," I started to say. "Play," he insisted. His eyes were clear, determined. He'd made his choice. With trembling hands, I raised the harmonica to my lips. I played Amazing Grace, the only hymn I could think of in that moment. Halfway through the song, Mikey called out, "Run!" Now. We ran. We had no choice, he was giving us his life. We made it about 20 yards before the explosion knocked us off our feet. When we turned back, there was nothing left of Michael Rodriguez but a dark stain on the snow and fragments no one would ever be able to piece back together. Sam vomited. Rick began to cry silently. Frank just stared, his face a mask of shock. I kept playing, my fingers moving automatically, the notes drifting over the red snow like a final benediction. We buried what we could find of him under a pine tree, marking the spot with a stack of rocks. No dog tags, those we kept to return to his family. No proper grave. Just rocks and snow and 4 broken-hearted boys trying to say goodbye to their friend. Rodriguez's place would have been something special, Frank said as we finished the makeshift grave. "Best damn green chili stew in Arizona," I added. "And pie," Rick whispered. "Don't forget the pie." Sam said nothing. He just placed the largest rock on top of the pile, sealing our promise to remember. We moved on because we had to. The Germans would have heard the explosion. We needed distance between us and that clearing. But a piece of each of us stayed behind under that pine tree. 2 days later, we still hadn't found our way back to American lines. The sound of distant artillery told us the battle was continuing. But we couldn't tell which direction it was coming from. The forest played tricks with sound, bouncing it off trees and hillsides. We were down to 1 ration between us, which we shared that morning, a few crackers each, a small piece of processed cheese, a cube of sugar. Our canteens were nearly empty, and we'd been reduced to melting snow in our hands to drink. Rick was showing signs of frostbite in his toes. Sam did what he could with our limited medical supplies, but without proper treatment. Rick would lose those toes, maybe the whole foot. Frank had developed a cough that kept getting worse. deep and wet, the kind that rattles in the chest. He tried to hide it, but we could all hear it. Pneumonia, maybe. Or just the cold getting deeper into his lungs. Either way, it wouldn't end well if we didn't find help soon. Around midday, we heard voices ahead, American voices. We approached cautiously, using the recognition codes we'd been taught. For a moment, it seemed our luck had finally turned. They were Americans, all right, a small squad that had become separated from their company, just like us. But unlike us, they'd found shelter, an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the woods. It wasn't much, but it had a roof and walls and a small iron stove that gave off precious heat. There were 6 of them originally, their sergeant told us. Now just 3. They let us in, shared what meager supplies they had. For a few hours, huddled around that tiny stove, we allowed ourselves to hope. We've been sending a man out each morning to try to make contact, their sergeant explained. No luck so far. Radio's dead, batteries froze. But we'll keep trying. That night, we slept in shifts, 3 men awake at all times, watching the approaches to the cabin. I took first watch with Frank and one of the other soldiers, a quiet Texan named Ellis. Around midnight, Sam shook me awake. "Frank's worse," he whispered. "Fever's way up. We need to get him to a medic station." I knelt beside Frank. His face was flushed, his breathing labored. When I touched his forehead, it burned like a hot stove. "Just need rest," Frank managed to say between coughs. "You'll get it," I promised, though we both knew it was a lie. At dawn, Rick volunteered to go with Ellis to try again to make contact with friendly forces. They headed west, following a small stream the sergeant thought might lead to a road. They'd been gone about an hour when we heard the shots, a quick burst of machine gun fire, then silence. Sam and I exchanged looks. We knew what it meant. The sergeant sent his remaining man out to check. He came back 20 minutes later, grim-faced. "Found them by the stream," he reported. "German patrol. Must have been lying in wait, dead." The sergeant asked, though we all knew the answer. The soldier nodded. Ellis took one in the chest. The red-headed kid, they shot him in the back while he was trying to run. Took their tags and boots. Rick O'Malley, 18 years old, who cried his first night of basic training. Who wanted to take over his father's butcher shop. Gone, just like that. I went outside, found a private spot between the trees, and played my harmonica. A quiet dirge for the baby-faced boy from Chicago who would never see his father's shop again. By the next morning, Frank could barely speak. His fever had climbed through the night. His lungs sounded like they were filled with water. Sam stayed by his side, using snow compresses to try to bring the fever down. But we all knew it was just postponing the inevitable. Around noon, Sam stepped outside to get more snow. He'd been gone only a minute when we heard it. A single rifle shot, followed by several more in quick succession. The sergeant and his men grabbed their weapons, moving to the windows. I stayed with Frank, who was drifting in and out of consciousness. "Germans," the sergeant hissed. "At least a squad. They must have followed your friend's tracks back here." There was no time to run, nowhere to hide. The cabin had only one door, 2 windows, a perfect trap. What followed was both terrifyingly fast and agonizingly slow. The Germans called for our surrender. The sergeant answered with rifle fire. They returned fire, hundreds of rounds tearing through the thin wooden walls. I dragged Frank off the cot, laid him on the floor, covered his body with mine. The sergeant's 2 remaining men died in the first volley. The sergeant himself took a bullet to the throat but managed to toss a grenade through the window before he fell. The explosion bought us maybe 5 minutes. Frank was fully conscious now, pain and fear burning through the fever. "They'll be back," he gasped. More of them. I know, I said. I had my sidearm, a .45 with 2 rounds left, and my combat knife. Not enough to hold off what sounded like a full German platoon. Get out, Frank urged. Back door, while they regroup. There was no back door. Just the tiny window on the rear wall, barely big enough for a man to squeeze through. And even if I could get out, I couldn't take Frank with me. Not leaving you, I told him. Frank's hand found mine, squeezed with surprising strength. Yes, you are. His eyes were clear despite the fever. One of us has to make it. Tell our stories. Before I could argue, he pulled himself up to a sitting position, propped against the wall. With shaking hands, he checked the rifle across his lap. 5 rounds left. Go, he said. I'll cover you. Buy you some time. Frank, go. Damn you. He barked, then softer. Please, Jim. Let me do this last thing right. I heard the Germans regrouping outside. It was now or never. I squeezed Frank's shoulder one last time. I'll tell them all about you, I promised. The bridges you were going to build. He smiled through his fever. Play for me first. One song, so I did. One last time, I raised the harmonica to my lips and played Amazing Grace for my dying friend. The notes seemed to hang in the air, ethereal and pure, against the backdrop of war. When I finished, Frank closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with renewed purpose. Now go, he said, and don't stop running until you find our boys. I slipped through the window, belly crawling through the snow, to the tree line behind the cabin. I was halfway to the trees when I heard the Germans kick in the front door. Then came Frank's voice, strong despite everything. Welcome to the party, gentlemen. His rifle cracked once, twice, 3 times. I heard shouts in German, more gunfire. Then a final shot, Frank's last bullet, I suspect, saved for himself. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I ran as night fell, as the temperature dropped, as fresh snow began to fall. I ran because Frank had given his life so that I could. Sometime in the night, I crossed into American lines without even realizing it. A sentry found me, collapsed in the snow, nearly frozen to death. They took me to a field hospital, treated me for exposure and exhaustion. I tried to tell them about my friends, about the cabin, but fever had taken hold of me by then. For days, I drifted in and out of consciousness. By the time I was lucid again, the Battle of the Bulge was over. The Germans had been pushed back. The war was turning decisively in our favor. But none of that mattered to me. My war had ended in that cabin in the Ardennes. I was sent back to England to recover, then home to Kentucky by spring. The doctors said I was lucky. No permanent physical damage beyond some nerve damage in my toes from frostbite. The other damage, the kind you can't see, well, they didn't have names for that yet. Or, if they did, they didn't share them with simple country boys like me. I came home to a hero's welcome I didn't want or deserve. My parents were waiting at the train station. My father, older than I remembered. My mother, crying tears of joy. My brothers and sisters were there too, along with what seemed like half the county. But the only one who wasn't there was my youngest brother, Thomas. He'd enlisted after I did, been sent to the Pacific. He died on some island I'd never heard of, fighting an enemy I'd never seen. I carried the dog tags of my 4 friends home with me. It took months to track down all their families, letter writing, phone calls when possible. I promised them all I would visit in person someday, but it would be years before I could bring myself to do it. I tried to resume my life, worked the farm with my father, went to church on Sundays, nodded politely when people thanked me for my service, But I wasn't the same boy who had left Kentucky with dreams of glory. That boy had died somewhere in the snows of Belgium. At night, the dreams would come. I'd see them all: Mikey stepping on that mine, Rick running toward the stream, Sam somewhere in the woods, Frank in that cabin. I'd wake up screaming sometimes, other times I'd wake up crying. My father never asked about the war, he understood better than most. But one night, about a year after I came home, he found me sitting on the porch in the middle of the night, playing my harmonica and crying. He sat beside me, put his arm around my shoulders. "They were good men," he asked simply. "The best," I said. "Then honor them by living well," he told me. "It's all any of us can do." I tried, God knows I tried. But some wounds never fully heal. I met Sarah at a church social in 1947. She was kind and patient and didn't ask too many questions about the war. We were married a year later, had our first child, a son we named Franklin, in 1949. 2 daughters followed, Michelle in 1951 and Samantha in 1953. We named our youngest Richard, born in 1955. My own private memorial to the brothers I had lost. I never told Sarah the full story. Not all of it. Some burdens aren't meant to be shared. But she knew enough, knew why I sometimes woke up screaming their names. Why I would disappear to the back porch on certain anniversaries with nothing but my harmonica for company. We had a good life together. 56 years of marriage before cancer took her in 2004. The farm prospered enough. Our children grew, had children of their own. I now have 8 grandchildren and 11 great-grandchildren, with another on the way. I've lived to see wonders my friends never did. Men walking on the moon, computers in everyone's homes, phones that fit in your pocket. I've lived to see more wars too: Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf, Afghanistan, Iraq. Different places, different enemies, but always the same story. Young men sent to fight and die, coming home changed if they come home at all. When my grandsons came of age during Vietnam, I begged them not to enlist. Some listened, some didn't. That's the way of young men. They have to learn some lessons for themselves. Over the years, I kept my promises. I visited Mikey's family in Tucson. His mother had kept his room exactly as it was the day he left. I met Frank's parents in Harlem, saw the engineering textbooks still on his shelf. I went to Boston to see Sam's father, by then retired from his medical practice. And I spent a day with Rick's parents in Chicago, sitting in their butcher shop, listening to stories about their boy. To each family, I gave something, a story, a memory, something to help them know that their sons had been brave, had been loved, had been remembered. It wasn't enough. Nothing could be enough. But it was all I had to give. My own children grew up hearing sanitized versions of these stories. They knew their names: Uncle Mikey, Uncle Frank, Uncle Sam, Uncle Rick, as if they were actual relatives. In a way, I suppose they were. Family isn't always blood. I kept playing my harmonica through the years. Not as often as I once did. Life has a way of filling up with other responsibilities. But on certain days, December 16th, the anniversary of the start of the Battle of the Bulge, May 8th, V-Day, the birthdays of my fallen friends, I would take it out and play Amazing Grace, their song, our song. As I got older, my fingers became less nimble, my breath less strong. But the music remained. The memories remained. Now here I am, 100 years old, in this veterans' home with nurses half my age calling me dear and sweetheart. Most of the other veterans here fought in Vietnam or Korea. There's nobody left from my war. I'm a relic, a curiosity. The last man standing. My children visit when they can, though some live far away now. My grandchildren come less often, busy with their own lives, their own families. My great-grandchildren hardly know me, just the old man in the wheelchair who plays the harmonica sometimes. But that's all right, that's as it should be. Life goes on. Tonight, though, is special. Tonight, I've asked my family to gather. Tonight, I will play one last time for my brothers, for Mikey and his diner that never was, for Frank and his unbuilt bridges, for Sam, who just wanted to get home in one piece, for Rick, who never got to take over his father's shop. My harmonica is on the table beside me, worn smooth by decades of use. My father's cross still hangs around my neck. These two things have been my constants through a century of living. I'm tired now, the doctors say my heart is failing. I've outlived my war by 80 years, outlived most everyone who knew me as a young man. I've seen a century of history unfold. I've loved and lost and loved again. But through it all, I've kept one promise, I've remembered them. I've told their stories. I've played their song. And tonight, one last time, I'll play for them again. Then I'll join them wherever they are. I like to think they're waiting for me. Mikey with his easy smile, Frank with his serious eyes, Sam with his steady hands, Rick with his freckles and his youth. I imagine them saying, "Took you long enough, Cooper." And I'll say, "I had promises to keep." But for now, I'll raise this old harmonica to my lips one last time. I'll play Amazing Grace for my brothers, for the boys who never came home, for the men they never got to become. This is for you, my brothers. This is for all of you.